Chapter 22. Gain of function complete. The words flashed up on screen with the automated voice as Alessandro straightened uncomfortably in the silence that followed. Miracles did happen. His jaw firmed as he lay a comforting hand on Annika's shoulder, where she stood in their makeshift base, overlooking the stem pod that barely sustained Velda. They'd managed to pull her from the rubble. It was a miracle they'd found her in the first place. Annika couldn't explain it. She just knew where to look. Alessandro knew Velda was unlikely to recover, even with the stem pod and all the power that old lump of junk sucked up from their generator. He suspected Annika knew as much, not that she'd allow anyone to switch it off anytime soon. By the time they'd found Velda, she'd lost a lot of blood. He hadn't expected to find a pulse. His hand fell as he now strode to the door. Annika had been there for hours, not speaking, not eating or responding to anything or anyone, entirely focused on that rickety stem pod where her sister lay. She had to know the worst was coming. Alessandro very much doubted Velda would last the night, but glancing back, he had to admit it wouldn't be the first time Annika had pulled off a miracle. Back at his miserable excuse of a desk, Alessandro slipped on a pair of meta-glasses, but past memories projected over its immersion, far more vivid than its infographics. Horrific images. His mind often took him back there. His hands shook. Everything had fallen apart so quickly. It was hard to believe it was real and not some nightmare or VR ad hacking his thoughts as they so often tried. Across the world, governments had been overthrown in a matter of weeks. Political leaders torn limb from limb by ordinary civilians. Alice paled where he sat reliving it. It was his fault. What those leaders had done was unforgivable. Yes, had to be dealt with, yes, but looking back, other options now presented themselves. Ones he'd been too angry, too fearful to consider. As things stood, he had burnt numerous files to the blockchain, files which would have otherwise remained buried, along with the many before him who tried to expose the truth. He believed people needed to know that in seeing this evil, they'd get rid of it. So he released it. Everything on the first drive, the full, uncensored, horrific truth, made it immortal, immutable, and uncensorable on the decentralized web. What unraveled next chilled him to the bone. He never realized the depths to which rage would drag down the good and the sane. Nothing could have prepared him for how things had played out. He had thought it was only his life he was risking, and that of those who had committed these heinous crimes against humanity. In hindsight, he realized that had been naive. Those in power were torn from it, torn apart, from their homes, flood out of bunkers. Their screams still rang in his ears. Machines, drones, and weapons could not protect them. They were no match for the force they unwittingly created as their victims' loved ones, entire populations, turned on them. But it did not stop there. Rage gripped populations, unleashing a beast with inhuman strength and an insatiable appetite for revenge. Despite most civilians being heavily drugged, overfed, undernourished, riddled with health complications and socially divided, nothing could prevent them from coming together to form a beast far bigger, far more ferocious than the one who consumed their loved ones. Within a few months, no one from the old order was left. Individuals took it upon themselves to decide what was right and wrong. Groups of rioters were found deciding on a whim who should live and who should die, who was an oppressor and who was the oppressed. The wealthy were targeted next in their luxury homes, viewed as those who benefit from or were connected to corrupt leaders, murdered, their wealth treasured by those who deemed its very ownership proof of corruption. This madness trickled all the way down to anyone able to afford or rent property. Innocent families and their households massacred and abused. If a person was not deemed a victim, they were labeled an oppressor. Ownership, race, faith, youth, sexuality, physical fitness, all became ever-changing markers to identify oppressors. Men, women, children, even their pets, murdered and abused as rage drowned out common sense, reality, and humanity. Asterisk. Grace had learned of the troubles in school, but seeing it play out in Mobius firsthand, feeling the reach of evil in Alay's account, was chilling. She shrank out of the depths of sleep and horror, the weight of all she'd seen threatening to drag her back, drown her. But 87 hauled her out to a light doze. "Ignorant pests," he ground, irritation carved to his brow as he studied all she'd seen since she slipped out of reach. harmful to other humans and human concerns. Not all of us, it felt like a personal attack. No, there's choice in that. How on earth she had sunk out of reach, and whether she'd done it intentionally, he couldn't be sure. But he was relieved to have a hold on her again. He couldn't have her running rampant through Mobius, could see just how frighteningly close she'd got to certain information. He'd have to keep her out until... How do they not see it? What they've become? They're monsters. She felt 87's sober nod. He knew all too well. They were asleep for the change and woke in a world of filters, without mirrors. Like an autoimmune disease, they target others, destroy them, destroy these people that reflect with accuracy. These vital human transistors, shutting off taps which allow for the flow of life and energy through Mobius to circulate, sustaining this world which they have become so attached to, where time is fundamental and entropy king. Grace looked shaken. It's not entropy. It's evil, satanic, whatever you want to call it. They're possessed by it. You people have a flair for drama, 87 drawled with mock amusement. It's an opposing force, no more. Here in the test net, it's necessary. Free will and all that. Satan literally means the opposer. Doesn't matter what it means. Look at what it does, it's power. Terror laced each word. She could feel herself shaking as 87's metaphysical mind wrapped around. In Mobius, touch wasn't external. It was saturating, a complete overlay of being, warmth, and comfort. It's not frightening if you understand power, Grace. Consider, if the consequence of human beings creating their own rules places us all outside of fundamental order, then entropy is inevitable. Now consider this great opposer's power. It can only expedite that which would have happened anyway. It has all the finite power of a destructive child. After all, anyone can destroy something quicker than it would naturally deteriorate in a place where time is fundamental. Real power is that which can reverse entropy, bring about something new, something beautiful, powerful, something that could never have existed here had it not. The sort which can create life and allow fragile beauty to thrive in the inhospitable. Now that is power, and that is in us all. Like love? Grace felt 87 scoff. What? I'm right, aren't I? Doesn't matter, he laughed. You can't identify or make use of it. You can't even describe it. Of course I can. It's affection, romance, stability from someone who cares. Wrong, 87 interrupted rudely, enjoying the high perch he'd resumed in her mind, peering through the net curtains that wrapped round them from where she lay. They are byproducts. Love pulls back the veil of ignorance, seeks betterment for all, and allows one to step into the unknown, honoring the fundamental, enjoying it forever. Innate, Grace felt herself relax, and once again, she drifted back from the shores to deeper sleep. Wait, no, 87 cursed, diving in after her in an attempt to drag her back. But for all his searching, he couldn't find her. She was gone again. Fishing himself back out, he sat a while, hoping for her to surface again, but she didn't. Asterisk. Alessandro rubbed his brow. He had tried to confront evil, cut off its head by exposing and targeting those responsible, but even after their murder, it only grew, spread like wildfire. The power of those fallen leaders transferred to enraged citizens like a virus, a transcendent force of death and suffering. Unable to watch, he hid away, not knowing what to do, paralyzed by guilt and grief, not eating, not sleeping. He wanted to die. Once the people had exhausted the injustice of the wealthy, he had hoped that would bring an end to it, but it didn't stop. Over time, as resource dwindled, anyone who had anything became an oppressor, a fair target. Madness broke out, spread like a disease. People tore each other apart. It was every man for himself, absolute hell on earth. Innocent blood was on his hands. He continued to hide in his darkened room for months. Everything inside him cried out in desperation to something greater, to reset the balance, calm the storm. He had been trying to help. Although not a religious man, Grace saw some kind of hardwiring deep inside him begin to beg and bargain with fundamentals for intercession on his behalf. That night he drifted to the quiet reprieve of sleep and woke the next day to find the face of an angel over him. Annika's emerald eyes sparkling down, where he lay inside that very same stem pod which Velda now used. "You're quite the dreamer," she chirped, gesturing to the monitor.